They found the freighter by accident. It drifted at the edge of the Veskar shallows, a lump of dead metal lost in the reflection of a dim yellow star. No transponder, no running lights, only a faint radiation signature from the core and a slowly decaying heat bloom from its drive. On the bridge of ISS Emberline, Captain Idris Valcourt watched the derelict turn on the holo. It was a black shape against the star, rotating gently, shedding flecks of frozen vapor that caught the light in brittle glints. The tactical overlays tagged it as Praeux manufacture with a 98% certainty. Idris felt his jaw tighten. The Praeux never left things lying around. When they were finished with prey, they erased it, then scrubbed the scrubbers. Range? He asked. 76,000 kilometers and closing, Nikhil Banerjee replied without looking up from his console. No response to hails, hull breaches along portside cargo spines, minimal power in the core. I'm not seeing any active defense fields. Argus 9, the ship's primary AI, waited the space of a heartbeat before adding in its calm, genderless voice. Probability of intentional dereliction, low. Catastrophic failure or external attack, high. I detect Praeux encryption handshakes in the nav core, but they're in a lockout state. On the main display, a new glyph pulsed near the freighter's bow. The stylized talons of the Praeux Synarchy. The bridge crew went quiet for a moment. No one liked being this close to anything with that emblem on it. Idris let the silence stretch long enough for each of them to settle their nerves. He was aware of their eyes flicking to him, measuring him, as they always did in these moments. He knew he looked too young for the decisions he carried, despite the stress lines carved into his face. Some part of him still thought of himself as the kid who watched the first footage of a Praeux hunt and promised himself, shaking in front of a screen, that he would never be easy prey. Any sign it's a trap? He asked. Nothing yet, Amaria Quincy murmured, leaning forward, fingers dancing over her own displays. As Emberline's intelligence analyst, she had learned to see patterns in the noise. No peripheral mines, no cloaked platforms within standard scan range. If there's an ambush, it's subtle even by their standards. Praeux don't usually do salvageable derelicts, Oleg Volkovich said from the secondary pit, voice a growl that came naturally to him. If it isn't a trap, it's a message. They don't send us messages, Idris said mildly, not ones they expect us to understand. He studied the spinning freighter again. Its hull was scored and pitted. A long section amidships had been punched in, metal peeled back like a wound. No escape pods were visible. There might be survivors inside, but if so, they were probably dead already. Praeux designs were not known for their generous life support margins. He found himself thinking of a simple equation. Unknown Praeux asset plus frontier location equals risk. But there was another side to it. Unknown data plus Praeux equals value. Humanity had learned late, and at terrible cost, that ignorance was exactly what the Synarchy counted on. Recommend boarding, Argus 9 said. Idris was not surprised. Argus 9 was calibrated to be cautious, but not timid. We could just slag it and go, Oleg suggested. Mark the grid. Warn traffic. Be on our way. We're here to learn, Idris reminded him gently. Not hide. On a different ship, under a different captain, the calculus might have fallen the other way. But Idris carried within him the memory of entire cities lifted screaming into Praeux harvesters while the rest of the galaxy looked away. Sergeant Ibanez, he said, raising his voice just enough to carry to the comm station. Prepare a boarding team. Hard vac entry. Full radiation suits. Assume minimal structural integrity and potential biological hazards. We're going in. Copy that, Captain. Mateo's voice came through a second later from the drop bay, steady and almost cheerful. He always sounded most alive on the edge of risk. The prey freighter was colder than death. Mateo's mag boots touched down on the hull with a soft thunk. The sound echoed oddly in his helmet, as it always did in vacuum. Behind him, Oleg set down with more force, the big man's weight bending the metal faintly. 2 more Marines completed the squad, all of them tethered together and to the Emberline's launch line. Radiations within tolerances. Argus 9's voice came over the squad channel. Life support appears offline. I detect very low residual atmosphere in some compartments. No movement signatures. No obvious ones, Matteo muttered. His heart rate was elevated, but not dangerously so. Argus had monitored his vitals for years and could read the patterns. They both knew that a little fear honed his reflexes. He looked up, the curve of the starscape impossible to ignore. Emberline hung a short distance away, her hull lights dimmed, her profile a sleek silhouette against the mottled clouds of the shallows. She seemed a reassuring presence, like a home port that could lift its own anchors and run. "Cut us in here," he said, indicating a section of hull near a cargo spine. "Give me a meter-wide circle." Oleg unlimbered the cutter. White fire bloomed against the black plating as the tool bit in. Tiny molten droplets drifted briefly in microgravity before freezing. In Matteo's peripheral vision, HUD indicators tagged them and filtered them out. When the cut was complete, Oleg kicked inward gently. The metal disc tumbled into a dark space beyond. A shadowy corridor was revealed, lit only by their suit lamps and the occasional undisguised gleam of exposed wiring. "After you," Oleg said. Matteo slid through the gap, flipped, and caught hold of an internal strut. His lamp swept the corridor. Bulkheads, sealed hatchways, a faint dust of frost along some seams. The silence was thick enough to feel. He moved forward. The others followed, Oleg bringing up the rear. "Argus, you with us?" he asked. "I am occupying 18 drones on the freighter and relaying through your helmets. I will overlay your route to the main cargo spines." Arrows and wireframe corridors appeared in Matteo's field of view, superimposed on the physical reality. He followed them, boots clinking softly with each step. As they moved deeper, the damage grew more apparent. A section of wall had buckled inward as if something had punched it from outside. Matteo paused long enough to study the edges. The metal was burned and twisted, the hole irregular. "Impact from micromunition or hull fragment," he assessed. "Not standard Praeux demolition." "Agreed," Argus 9 said. "The ship was attacked by something that did not intend this to be an orderly salvage, or a safe one," Oleg muttered. They reached the cargo spine. The hatch, a thick composite, resisted their codes and cutters alike, until Argus sent a focused burst of Praeux encrypted override. The door groaned, then obediently unlocked. The space beyond was vast, stretching out of sight in both directions. The squad's lamps revealed rows of cylinders stacked in latticed racks, each about the length of a human adult, each laced with tubes and cables. Frost rimed the surfaces. Matteo stepped in slowly, almost reverently. The air, such as it was, felt colder here, though his suit insisted there had been no temperature change. "Containers," Oleg said, unnecessarily. "Cryotubes," Argus corrected. "Praeux model. These are used for biological storage and transit." "You mean people?" one of the younger Marines whispered. "Or animals," another said, but without conviction. Matteo floated closer to the nearest tube. The surface was clouded, but not opaque. He wiped at the frost with a gloved hand, revealing a fleshy blur within. For a dizzy second, he could not parse the shapes. Then they resolved into limbs, an oversized cranium, dark eyes closed in sleep. "Kid," he breathed. The child was small, but not newborn small. A crest of fine, almost translucent spines ran from brow to the back of the skull. The jawline was more pronounced than human, the musculature different, tail curled against the body, but the proportions were unmistakable. This was a young one of some humanoid species. "Agris, confirm," he said tightly. "There are 312 tubes in this spine," the AI replied. "Biological signatures in 291 of them. All appear to be in low metabolism stasis. Genetic analysis." There was a pause as Argus finished its sequence. "The primary genome matches known data for a Synarchy client species, Nhari, combat engineered, used as close-quarters hunters on select Praeux expeditions. Those things they turned loose in the Yesh colony arcologies," Oleg said, his voice darkening. "I saw the vids. They ran on the walls. The thought of a whole cargo bay full of young versions of those nightmares made one of the Marines swallow audibly. "Look at the marking," Amari said across the channel. She had tied into their sensor feeds from the bridge. There, on the side. Those glyphs are culling codes. Matteo focused on the label embossed into the metal adjacent to the tube. It was a block of Praeux characters. Argus overlaid a translation, projecting human letters under each sign. Lineage, Nhari breeding lot P6 Khasru Delta. Genetic variance, non-compliant. Projected obedience, 0.13. Classification, refuse. Processing queue, 3. Refuse. He went, still. He realized suddenly how fine his breath sounded in his ears, too fast. Argus, he said slowly. Confirm, refuse. In Synarchy logistical codes, the AI said, this term denotes biological matter scheduled for depolymerization and nutrient reclamation. These children were en route to be broken down into feedstock. Matteo's gut roiled. He thought of his little niece, born a few years earlier on a spin habitat back home. He had visited during leave, had held her as she blinked up at him with unfocused eyes and made small, questioning noises. He imagined some alien classification stamped on her crib, analyzing her genes, her probabilities, and discarding her with a word. Captain, he said, his voice very careful. You're seeing this? On Emberline's bridge, Idris was already on his feet, fingers white around the rail. I see, he said. Behind him, Yara Rami closed her eyes, even knowing what she did of the Praeux. A small part of her had not believed they would be so efficient. Lena Albana stood motionless at the science console, staring at the frozen forms on the display. Her training kicked in despite the surge of horror. She was noting limb ratios, cranial capacity, inferred neural density. She could already see the traits the Praeux had decided were undesirable. Amari's jaw was clenched, but her mind was racing. New data, new angles. Captain, Argus said, this presents a significant diplomatic and strategic dilemma. It was an understatement, and everyone on the bridge knew it. These infants, Lena said, voice low but clear, are legally Praeux property under current interstellar accords. So far as the Synarchy is concerned, their classification and ultimate fate are internal matters. If we interfere. Sulamit Belsky cut in from a secure channel on Bastion K2, her holo image flickering into existence near the command well. We violate every tenet we've publicly agreed to so far. That puts us at odds not just with the Praeux, but with every cautious ally who thinks we're reckless enough already. She was not physically present, but her dark eyes took in the scene with the same level of detail as the rest of them, courtesy of the direct feed. Behind her, Idris could see the austere walls of a covert conference suite on K2. You're assuming we tell anyone. Oleg's voice crackled through the shared link. Captain, Yara said softly. They're children. In the cargo spine, Matteo shifted his stance unconsciously, as if putting himself between the cryotubes and an invisible threat. Idris looked at the silent rows of pods. He thought of all the words that had been used to describe humans by more established civilizations in the months after first contact. Volatile, sentimental, reckless, unpredictably altruistic. He had worn those labels like armor. Lena, he asked, what happens if we do nothing? If we log this and walk away? She knew he already knew the answer. He was making her say it so that everyone else heard. They die in a Praeux processing complex, she said. They're broken down, recovered for industrial feedstock. No names, no lives. The Synarchy chose them for termination because their genes don't fit the predator template, Amari added. They were selected for traits the Praeux consider weaknesses. Like? Oleg demanded. High social bonding indices, empathy markers, atypical neural plasticity, the kind of deviations that could undermine hunt discipline. Idris's gaze sharpened. They culled them for being too cooperative or too unpredictable, Amari said. From their perspective, that's often the same thing. Silence pressed in again, heavier this time, thicker than the vacuum around the freighter. Idris understood everyone's positions already. Sulamit saw the political fallout. Talla out there somewhere would see the strategic insanity. The cautious Jelathi would call it dangerous tampering. Amari saw opportunity. Lena and Yara saw an ethical line that made all others trivial, and he, as always, stood at the knife edge between. He remembered his father's voice at a kitchen table, years ago, talking about the first time they had watched a Praeux hunt together on a newsfeed. "They will test us," his father had said. "They will see what we're willing to live with. If we decide early that there are some lives it is too inconvenient to save, we might as well sign up as prey." Idris realized, with a weary clarity, that this was one of those tests. "If we take them," Sulamit said quietly from Bastion K2, "we have to hide them completely. The Jelathi will disown us if they find out we've weaponized a Praeux hound breed. The Synarchy will have a casus belli for open war. We are not ready for that." "We might never be ready," Yara said. "But we know exactly what it means to be the ones left in the dark while someone else's young are recycled into paste." Lena forced herself to speak calmly. "Captain, we are standing at a branch point. We can either let the Synarchy's design go unchallenged, or we can prove that it is not destiny. These children were thrown away because they had the potential to be something other than perfect hunters. That's exactly why they matter." Idris looked again at the nearest tube. The infant inside slept on, oblivious. "Mark their locations," he said to Argus. "Secure as many as we can. Pull the freighter into a covert trajectory. We'll tow her back to Bastion K2 under sensor suppression. Official report will say we found a derelict arsenal and scuttled it." Mateo exhaled very slowly, tension bleeding away into grim purpose. Sulamit shut her eyes briefly. In that moment, she accepted that entire political strategies would have to be rewritten or discarded. "Captain," Argus said, "this course of action significantly increases the probability of a major Synarchy response if discovered." "I know," Idris replied. "And if they ask in a few decades why we did it, we can tell them, because we don't feed babies to your grinders, no matter what their genome says." He felt the decision settle into place inside him like a keel finding water. "Dr. Elbana," he said, "I believe you're about to get a very unusual research program." Lena's hand tightened on the console. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, she answered, "Project Kinforge, then. We'll see what the prey threw away." The thawing took place in a secure chamber on Bastion K2. The room had once been a cargo hold. Now it was a nursery, painted in soft, neutral colors and filled with an absurd, hopeful assortment of human-made toys and sensory aids. Lena stood beside the first cryotube as its systems cycled. Tiny puffs of condensation curled away as seals cracked. Warm, oxygenated air flowed in. Technicians checked readouts, all under the watchful eye of Argus 9's distributed presence in the station. The Praeux-coded status indicators slowly shifted from dormant to active. The being inside twitched, then spasmed, as long muscles contracted for the first time under gravity. Lena's heart pounded. Her medical training told her what to watch for: respiratory distress, neurological seizures, cascading failure in organs that had never had to do more than idle. Her deeper, more primitive instincts were telling her that something dangerous was about to wake up. The infant gasped, coughed, and then cried. It was a raw, scraping sound, not quite like any human infant's wail, but it carried all the same elements: confusion, pain, demand for comfort. Without thinking, Lena reached in as the top of the tube folded aside. The child's skin was cooler than she expected, faintly scaled along the spine. Its eyes snapped open wide, black irised, reflecting the room in miniature. They locked onto her face. She had expected fear or aggression. Instead, she saw blank, startled curiosity. "Hello," she said softly, voice shaking only a little. "You're safe." The infant made a questioning noise and reached toward her with surprisingly strong fingers. They closed on the fabric of her sleeve, nails pricking her skin through the material. Lena felt something click within her, a rearrangement of priorities. On the rim of the cryotube, the Praeux label glinted faintly. She had memorized the glyphs by now. She didn't need Argus to tell her what they meant. Lineage, variance, projected obedience, final call. She took a scraper from the tray and, with deliberate strokes, removed the etched marking that signified the final judgment, a symbol denoting waste. "Doctor?" a technician said, half protesting. "We will not be reminding them what the Synarchy intended," Lena replied. "They don't need that hanging over them when they learn to read." She paused, then, on impulse, uncapped a human stylus and wrote directly on the tube's metal surface, just above where the glyph had been. Her handwriting, in the curved characters of her native Arabic, came out steadier than she felt. Kheris. It was an old word from a story her grandmother used to tell, one that meant grace under pressure, resilience without hardening into cruelty. The infant squeezed her sleeve again, teeth just beginning to emerge in its narrow jaw. "Welcome to the world, Kheris," she whispered. Around them, more tubes hissed and opened, and the nursery filled slowly with the sound of alien children waking into a world that had not been built to receive them. Time, measured in station days and sleepless nights, blurred and then took on a new cadence. Project Kinforge grew from a handful of volunteers into a self-contained mini-society. Bastion K2 carved out entire decks for the undertaking. Security locks and censorship protocols ringed the zones like layers of armor. But within, the atmosphere was that of an odd, intense boarding school. The Nhari young grew fast. Their metabolisms, tuned by Praeux geneticists, raced. In 3 years, they reached the equivalent of human adolescence. Every month brought new bone lengthenings, new neural connections. Kheris learned to move with a predatory fluidity that made even veteran Marines uneasy. Senu, one of the quieter ones, spent hours with Argus 9's interface slates, fascinated by patterns on screens. Larku, shorter and wirier, was perpetually disappearing into ventilation shafts and maintenance crawl spaces, mapping the station's skeleton. Lena watched them with a scientist's interest and a guardian's anxiety. The Nhari's instincts were not metaphors. One afternoon, in a gym reconfigured as a climbing course, 2 of them got into a competition that tipped into violence. Kheris, then in his mid-teens by human measure, lashed out at another youth who had bested him on a vertical wall. His hand shot to the other's throat with lethal precision, nails digging in exactly where a crushing grip would have collapsed the windpipe. Human instructors shouted. Whistles blew. It happened too fast for most of them to react. Only Yara, whose familiarity with trauma made her anticipate danger from a certain flicker in Kheris's eyes, was close enough. She caught his wrist, just shy of full force, muscles straining as she diverted the vector. Kheris hissed, pupils blown wide, every line of him coiled to kill. For an instant, the entire course froze. Nhari youngsters hung from grips and ledges, staring. Human mentors held their breath. Yara could see the exact moment when awareness returned to Kheris's gaze. His breathing hitched, his grip slackened slightly under her hand, then released entirely. The other Nhari staggered back, rubbing his neck, confused and humiliated but alive. Silence stretched, full of all the possibilities of what could come next. Yara did something that startled everyone. She did not shout, did not berate. Instead, still holding Kheris's wrist lightly, she said, "Walk with me." He came because some part of him, even in the throes of near violence, trusted the human counselor who had always been honest with them. They walked the perimeter of the gym, away from the other youths, toward a wide viewport that looked out over the star-speckled vastness of the shallows. "What just happened?" she asked, not unkindly. "He bared his teeth," he mocked. "Think carefully," she said. "Tell me what you felt, not what you think about it now." Kheris ground his jaw. Memories came in flashes, the surge of insult, the instinctive algorithm that translated threat into target, into kill. Underneath that, a flicker of something else. Fear of being seen as weak in front of his peers. "I felt smaller," he admitted reluctantly. "Exposed, and the answer your body offered was to remove the thing that made you feel that way," Yara said. "So you reached for his throat." He bristled. "We are made to kill. You trained us to fight more. Did we?" Yara asked. "Or did we show you how to use something that was already there?" He hated that the question made sense. He twisted his fingers together in a way that would have looked like knuckle cracking on a human. I am dangerous, he said. There was no boast in it, only flat recognition. Yes, Yara agreed. So is a human soldier with a rifle. So is a surgeon with a scalpel. So is a Praeux with their entire synarchy behind them. The difference is choice. He frowned. You felt belittled, she continued. Your instincts told you killing would solve that. Now you have the space, the nervous system architecture, to ask, do I have to follow that first impulse? Do I like where it takes me? He looked away toward the stars, then back at her. It is like fighting gravity. Exactly, she said gently. The pull doesn't go away. You just learn when to resist and when to fall with it. Gravity is not evil. Instinct is not evil. But if you never learn that you can choose, someone else can build your whole life around that tug. He thought of prey breeding pits he had never seen except in recovered files and visceral dreams. He thought of the word Lena refused to let them use for themselves, the classification they had been stamped with before birth. If we had stayed with the prey, he said slowly, they would have let that first impulse rule. They would have cultivated it, Yara said. That is how they keep control, not by suppressing your nature, but by editing which parts of it get rewarded. Here, we're trying to give you more than one script. It's harder this way, but it's yours. He fell silent again, tail tip flicking in thought. He did not apologize to the other youth that day. That came later, in an awkward, half-mumbled exchange in a corridor that nonetheless mattered more than any forced confession. Yara watched from a distance, unseen, and understood that somewhere between these small moments, something fundamental was shifting in the Nhari's internal landscape. Not all of them chose the same paths. When the Nhari reached late adolescence, Project Kinforge's staff offered them branching tracks. Humans had argued fiercely among themselves about this. Some wanted to guide the Nhari firmly toward nonviolent roles, scientists, artists, diplomats. Others thought that a species engineered for combat would never be safe or whole if denied any outlet. Idris argued, in his steady voice, that removing their choices would simply reproduce the Synarchy's sin by another name. You can't preach autonomy and then force them to be peaceful, he said during one late-night session, leaning back in a chair in Bastion K2's planning room, while a flattened image of the shallows glowed between all present. We can show them options. We can put every caution in place. But if we decide, unilaterally, that they are too dangerous to make this choice, we're only reskinning Praeux doctrine with better branding. Lena hated that he was right. She also hated that he looked more tired every passing month. So they asked the Nhari. Some took roles in station operations. Senu gravitated to Argus and data analysis, spending long hours in a small room laced with holo displays, where he could watch simulations flicker by and test his own predictions against the AIs. Larku, unsurprisingly, became indispensable in covert mobility, vent crawling, system mapping, stealth drills. A core group gravitated toward combat. They wanted to test themselves, to see if all the training meant anything beyond padded training rooms. They had grown up watching human war footage edited, regulated, but still potent. To them, it meant empowerment. We want to help, Kheris told Idris in the captain's ready room, his claws tapping lightly on the desktop. You saved us. The Praeux will come for you. We can see angles you can't. Idris regarded him for a long moment. Do you understand, he said, that if you become soldiers, some of you will die? That there will be no guarantee your deaths will be meaningful? No tidy story arcs? War is not a holovid. Kheris's pupils contracted. Do you think we don't know death? We saw the culling records, Captain. Senu found them. We have been dying since before we took our first breath. At least this way, it will be for something we chose. Idris exhaled slowly. The bitterness at the edge of Kheris's words hurt more than open anger would have. We aren't raising you to be a weapon, Idris said. We're raising you to be free. Whatever that looks like to you. Then let us freely decide to fight. Kheris said, with you, not as your hounds, as your allies. He meant it, and Idris could see that. The captain also saw, with an ache as real as any injury, that once again he was standing on ground where no older power would have allowed itself to stand. Idris nodded. "Then we train you fully," he said. "And we put in writing that any Nhari can refuse combat duty at any time without punishment. You won't be conscripted by us, any more than we would accept you being conscripted by the Praeux." Project Kinforge codified that agreement like a covenant. Some would later call it naive. Others would call it the only thing that made the whole experiment morally tenable. Word, of course, did not stay sealed forever. For nearly a decade, Bastion K2 and Emberline managed to keep the Nhari's existence out of official channels. On paper, Project Kinforge was a theoretical study on asymmetric counterhunt tactics. The children, adolescents, then young adults of a species the Praeux considered property, lived their hidden lives in the interstices of human bureaucracy. But secrets leak, if only in the form of anomalies. An unusual pattern of encrypted traffic, procurement orders that didn't quite match declared personnel counts, training simulations subtly tweaked to account for bodies that moved very differently from standard human soldiers. In the Jelathi Commonality's intelligence chambers, these anomalies coalesced. They delivered a report to envoy Talla, a mid-level diplomat with a reputation for both caution and uncomfortable curiosity. Humans are hiding something on Bastion K2, the Jelathi analysts concluded. Possibly an illegal weapons program. Possibly something worse. Talla had always tried to understand humans beyond the caricatures. They had listened to Idris in hidden meetings, watched Sulamit maneuver in dangerous currents. They knew humanity's weaknesses as well as its strengths. Naive, yes, prone to moral theatrics, but also capable of the kind of ruthless calculation the Jelathi had quietly feared they themselves might have lost. When the commonality sent Talla on a routine inspection of K2, they expected a confirmatory report and perhaps a set of recommendations for stern warnings. They did not expect Talla to return with their entire view of predator and prey inverted. Talla arrived at Bastion K2 in the shimmering carapace of a Jelathi exosuit, a mobile water-filled tank that allowed their gelatinous aquatic body to move in human-standard environments. Their tendrils pressed against the inner surface, tasting the air through sensors. Sudden changes in station gravity made their suit's gyros hum. Talla swallowed down disorientation and followed Sulamit through metal corridors that hummed with life. They were shown laboratories, tactical centers, shield generator rooms, everything they had expected to see, and nothing more. Talla, who had negotiated with races that used smiles as lies and sorrow as camouflage, knew what a carefully curated tour looked like. Impressive, they said, voice translated into sound by a speaker embedded in the suit, and entirely ordinary. Sulamit's lips compressed in a wry acknowledgement. "We are model citizens." Talla's amusement was thin. "And yet," they said pleasantly, "your simulations show you accounting for elite close-quarters units with sensor profiles that do not match your physiology. Your food imports spiked in proportion to your crew count only if your people suddenly began eating far more than their reported metabolism requires, or if you are feeding something else." For a breath, Sulamit considered lying. Then she dismissed the thought. Talla was too sharp, and if the commonality already suspected weapons programs, they might as well manage the revelations, rather than be caught in a denial. "Has any Jelathi watched childcare footage from human worlds?" Sulamit asked suddenly. Talla hesitated. "It is not a common entertainment category among my people," they admitted. "We prefer more abstract narratives." "Then perhaps," Sulamit said, "you should see something different." She led Talla down a corridor that did not appear on any public schematics. Security fields recognized her biometrics and parted like invisible veils. Talla's exosuit registered a subtle increase in atmospheric humidity, the faint smell of cleaning agents, and something else. Warmth mixed with organic complexity. Then they heard it, the murmur of many voices. High-pitched, trilling, clicking, some laughing, some crying. Not human. Talla stopped at the threshold of a wide observation window. Beyond was a space full of movement. Children ran, climbed, tussled, built elaborate structures out of soft blocks. Not human children. Their limbs were longer, their bodies leaner, Their tails swayed for balance. Spine crests fluttered. Muscles flowed under patterned skin. Some played cooperative games guided by human tutors. Others sprawled on the floor, rapt, as a holo projected images of distant stars. Talla watched, tendrils pressing unconsciously harder against their suit's inner wall. One of the young looked up, gaze flicking to the observation window. Dark eyes met Talla's through two panes and a thin layer of water. Curiosity flared there, and no immediate hostility. The observation hatch slid open. Rami stepped inside, followed closely by Kheris, now nearly full-grown in Nhari terms. He wore a training suit and carried himself with an ease that said it was not for show. Sulamit made quick introductions. Talla inclined their suits slightly in a Jelathi gesture of greeting. "These are Nhari," they said slowly, recognizing the morphology from dire reports. "Praeux hounds." "They were supposed to be," Yara said. "These were selected for destruction before they could be trained for that life. The Synarchy judged them unfit." Talla turned toward Sulamit. "And you decided to keep them," they said. "Equal parts awe and incredulity. To raise them, to give them the chance to choose," Sulamit corrected. "You have taken Praeux property," Talla said. The diplomatic phrasing tasted like something spoiled in their mouth. "You are altering their breeding programs. This is astonishingly dangerous." Idris, who had joined them silently, spoke then. "The Praeux decided," he said, "that these children had no place in their order. They stamped them for processing. We intercepted them. We made a different choice. And if they find out," Talla demanded, "they will not merely protest. They will purge." "They already intend to," Amari's voice said from a nearby console. She had pulled up a file, overlaying it in the air. Praeux communications, intercepted and decoded. "Their hunt rotations show a planned escalation in the next cycle. We are all on their schedule, whether we behave or not." Talla studied Kheris. The Nhari studied Talla in turn. Two beings, built by entirely different biologies and cultural histories, staring at each other through all the layers of translation. Atmospheric, linguistic, moral. "You are not afraid of us?" Talla asked Kheris directly. Kheris flicked his crest. "I know what you are," he said. "You were willing to make deals with our breeders for protection. That's fear." Talla bristled slightly, then forced their tendrils to stillness. "And you? Are you not afraid of yourself?" He considered. "Yes," he said, "but I am not alone." He gestured slightly toward Yara, toward the room of children. "They showed us that fear is not an order, it is information." Talla's processors churned. They saw, all at once, the potential catastrophe. Nhari slipping their leashes and turning on anyone weaker than themselves. They also saw, to their surprise and discomfort, the potential salvation. A generation of beings bred for predation who had learned not to obey predatory codes. "If you fail," Talla said slowly to Sulamit and Idris, "if these youths become what the Synarchy intended, the galaxy will lay every atrocity they commit at your feet. You know this." "Yes," Sulamit answered. "We do. And you continue anyway." Idris's lips curved in a small, tired smile. "There's a phrase on old Earth," he said. "We don't negotiate with monsters about how best to be eaten. We change the rules." Talla knew, in that moment, that they could not simply go back and deliver a report that said shut this down. They would try to argue nuance, mitigation. They would buy time, because what they had seen was terrifying, yes, but also possibly the only kind of asymmetry that could break the Synarchy's grip. They chose silence. For the moment, it was not approval, exactly. But neither was it denunciation. The first field operation came sooner than anyone would have liked. Argus 9 picked up anomalies in a remote system. Praeux ships dropping in and out of the plane, leaving behind atmospheric disturbances on a pre-warp world. The pattern matched too many historical hunts for coincidence. Human command convened in Bastion K2's war room. Holograms of the target system hung over the table. Symbols flared where Praeux ships had appeared. "They're cataloging and staging," Amari said, pointing. "Setting up sensor nets. establishing beacon anchors, culling test groups. We've seen this script. We intervene? Oleg asked, his shoulders already squared. Idris rested his hands on the table's edge. We've done it before, quietly. Scrambled their sensors, nudged their prey off-world, through natural disasters. But this time, we have something more to test. His eyes flicked to Kheris, Senyu, and Larku, standing together at the edge of the circle. We want to go, Kheris said, before anyone could speak on his behalf. Let us see the ones who made us into files and columns. Lena's stomach nodded. You are ready on paper, she said. In reality, Kheris interrupted. We will never be ready if we never step into reality. Yara wanted to say no, but she also knew that insulating them indefinitely would breed resentment, not responsibility. In the end, Idris approved a limited mission. They would board a Praeux observation platform, gather data, disable its ability to direct the hunt in that system, and withdraw. Nhari units would accompany human Marines under strict rules of engagement. Non-lethal force where possible. No pursuing kills for their own sake. The shuttle ride to the platform was quiet. Kheris's hands flexed on his harness. Senu's eyes moved in small jumps as he silently ran simulations in his head, syncing them with Argus 9's projections. Larku rolled his shoulders, feeling the predictor weave hum along his nerves. The weave was a new addition, a neural mesh developed by humans and tailored with Nhari neurophysiology in mind. It took in sensor data, Argus 9 forecasts, squadmate positions, and fed them back into the user's perception as weighted anticipations, not visions. Just a sense that this corner would probably hide an ambush, that this timing would likely draw fire. To human brains, the weave was overwhelming. To the Nhari, already wired for rapid threat assessment, it felt like the environment itself had grown more articulate. They breached the Praeux platform with surgical precision. Oleg's charges peeled back the airlock. Mateo's team fanned in, movements precise, clearing sectors. Praeux corridors were utilitarian in a brutal way. No concessions to aesthetics, only function. Somehow, that offended the Nhari more than Baroque cruelty would have. Larku darted ahead, slipping through access panels that read his altered Nhari biometrics as low-level maintenance drones. He ghosted past enforcers before they knew he was there, tagging junctions for sabotage. Kheris caught their first glimpse of a Praeux technician in a monitoring room. The Synarchy's masters were almost delicate to look at, elongated and narrow, limbs long, skin a pallid gray with iridescent undertones. Their eyes were too bright, too cold. This one turned, startled, as the door hissed open. It registered the human armor, the Nhari silhouette, and its expression curved in something like offended surprise. It said something in a rapid series of clicks and consonants. Argus didn't bother to translate. The meaning was clear. Impossible. Kheris's world shrank. He saw, overlaying the present, the archival images he had watched late at night. Rows of Nhari children on examination tables. Praeux hands, pointing, selecting, culling. He saw the transport manifests marking his own batch for reclamation. His muscles tensed. The path from trigger to kill was a polished groove in his nervous system. His hand went to his weapon. In that fraction of a second, Yara's hundreds of hours with him existed only as echoes. But echoes, too, could change a course. You are dangerous, yes. So is a surgeon with a scalpel. The difference is choice. He saw his own future if he surrendered fully to the simple thrill of tearing out this being's throat. It was a future with a narrowing corridor of options, each kill making it easier to accept the next, each step returning him to the template the Praeux had built. The Praeux technician had dropped to its knees, hands raised instinctively, issuing a whining appeal in its own tongue. It had not expected mercy, but it knew the posture of supplication. Kheris's hand shook. Then, he shifted his grip, turned the weapon, and slammed the butt into the technician's head. The Praeux crumpled, unconscious. Behind him, one of the Marines let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Why? Larku hissed later when the mission debrief replayed the footage. One less cull right, One less, he was a tech, not a Culrite, Kheris snapped. He pulled levers. He didn't write the orders. They all benefit from. So do we, Kheris said. We benefit from their breeding programs, from their tech. You want to kill every single thing that ever sat in one of their chairs? Fine. Draw me the line so we can see if we're still on the safe side of it. Larku fell silent. The predictor weave fed him probabilities about where arguments like this led. Hard splits, fractured units, clean, simple hatreds, overtaking complicated loyalties. Yara, watching the recording with Idris and Lena, understood that this was the hinge they had been waiting to see. Not whether the Nhari could fight. That had never really been in doubt. But whether, at the edge of their instincts, they could pull themselves away from the precipice. Kheris had chosen restraint not because of softness, but because he recognized the strategic and moral trap the Synarchy had set for his entire kind. Idris felt something unclench in his chest. For the first time since the cryotubes, he allowed himself a cautious hope that they might not be breeding their own doom. The Praeux, however, could not be hoped into oblivion. The failed hunt, the missing technicians, the clipped Praeux comms seeded with Nhari biometric anomalies. These signs flowed back through the Synarchy's datanets. There, a different kind of intelligence processed them. Exactor Velith Ren was not the highest-ranking prey, but he was among the most feared. His entire career had been built on identifying contaminated lines and pruning them without pity. He viewed species and bloodlines the way a gardener viewed vines, something to be trained ruthlessly or cut entirely. When Velith received the report flagging a deleted Nhari batch allegedly recorded as processed and yet somehow implicated in a recent boarding action, he felt a rare flicker of interest. He stood in the control sphere of his personal cruiser, gazing at swirling displays that rendered data as abstract, beautiful patterns. To him, every line of code was a behavioral curve, every anomaly, a potential threat to the Synarchy's elegant predatory equilibrium. These humans, he murmured, his voice carrying faint amusement. They always find the wrong doors to open. His staff waited in silent deference. They knew better than to interrupt when he was in this mood. He traced a pattern in the air with one long finger. The displays reconfigured, showing trajectories, signal interceptions, the outline of Bastion K2's officially declared perimeter. They have taken our discards, Velith said. They are attempting to raise broken hounds. One of his subordinates, bolder than the rest, risked a question. Do you consider this significant, Exactor? Velith smiled thinly. Anything that violates design is significant, he said. They are playing with our fire. We will burn them, and then we will adjust our filtration matrices. This was an oversight. There will be no more such oversights. He issued orders calmly, precisely. Surveillance intensification around human-controlled sectors, infiltration of their communication webs, preparation of a response force. The next hunt cycle would not just cull prey worlds, it would also serve as cover for erasing this aberrant wrinkle. Back on Bastion K2, the news of the Synarchy's impending escalation arrived in cold data bursts. Amari Ekwensi stood in front of a holomap that glowed crimson at too many points. Each red icon marked a system where the prey had begun the early steps of their hunt pattern. Surveying, seeding observation platforms, deploying Culrite teams. Their plan was bolder than usual. Multiple worlds at once, spanning a wider swath of the shallows and beyond. It was a flex of power, a demonstration to anyone watching that the Synarchy's hand had not weakened. They're overextending, Senyu observed quietly from his place near the wall. The Nhari strategist's head tilted in that distinctive way he had when he was running internal simulations. Explain, Idris prompted. They are assuming no coordinated resistance, Senyu said. They have modeled local interventions, isolated evacuations, small-scale skirmishes. But no one has ever hit their central processing infrastructure in the middle of a cycle. No one has ever had cause to, or the ability. Amari's eyes lit. You mean Khasru? On the map, that word corresponded to a cluster of heavy Praeux symbols. Their main processing world, the crucible where countless cold individuals had been broken down, and where the central database of genetic classifications was preserved. The Culright's coordinate from there, Amari said. They manage the files, the classifications, the hierarchies, their whole world view of who is predator, who is prey. If we hit that, we don't just rescue a few more children. Lena finished for her, voice low. We cut their philosophy at the roots, Sulamit frowned, and possibly provoke a level of retaliation that makes the current hunt cycle look like a diplomatic spat. We're already on their menu, Oleg said. Question is whether we die cleaning plates or overturning the table. Outside, beyond the hull, the shallows simmered with potential conflict. Inside, with that old human stubbornness, they plotted to do something no saner species would even consider. We cannot stop them everywhere, Idris said. We don't have the ships, the alliances, the time, but we can hit them where they don't expect resistance. He turned to Kheris, Senu, and Larku. You asked to fight beside us, he said. This is what it looks like when we decide the battlefield. The Nhari stepped forward almost as one. We will go, Kheris said. His voice held no theatrical bravado, only steady resolve. Let us see where they plan to melt us down. Let us show them what their refuse becomes when given a chance. Preparation for Khasru was unlike previous missions. The Ember Phalanx, so named by the Nhari themselves, to honor the ship that had carried them from a death-scheduled fate formalized in those weeks. They drew up their own symbols, a stylized flame curling around a broken Praeux glyph, repurposed into a mark of defiance. Each Nhari in the Phalanx underwent the predictor weave integration. The procedure was not without risk. Some emerged disoriented, their senses overloaded by the flood of anticipatory data. Others adapted quickly, their innate pattern recognition making the weave feel almost natural. Senu became the first Nhari to fully co-run simulations with Argus 9, not as a subordinate human operator, but as a partner, his intuition complementing the AI's number crunching. Together, they explored thousands of virtual Khasru assaults. In almost all of them, Emberline and a good fraction of the assault force were destroyed. In a small handful, they succeeded in their objectives and escaped with varying degrees of damage. Those slender green paths on Argus's charts were where humans tended to point and say, we can work with that. The plan, when it settled, was brutal and elegant. While human and Jelathi fleets conducted diversionary attacks at the periphery of Praeux space, carefully calibrated to draw attention but not commit full forces, Emberline would slip into the Khasru system using a risky micro-jump maneuver, appearing within the orbit of the primary moon, inside expected interdiction zones. Oleg and his assault marines would neutralize an outer defense platform to open a window. Then, Nhari dropships, piloted by Tomas Roque and others, would plunge straight into the atmosphere toward the processing complexes. The goal was threefold: seize control of the genetic archives, broadcast their contents to the galaxy, and rescue as many still suspended infants as physically possible before Praeux reinforcements crushed them. No one pretended this would be clean. No one pretended they would all make it back. Idris walked the Ember Phalanx barracks the night before departure. He moved silently, not wanting to be too visible, but unable to stay away. He passed Kheris's bunk. The Nhari sat on its edge, weapon disassembled on the sheets, hands moving automatically as his mind ran elsewhere. You should be resting, Idris said gently. Kheris looked up, his eyes reflecting the dim bunk lights. You aren't, he pointed out. Captains rarely sleep well before doing insane things, Idris said dryly. Kheris's crest flicked in something like amusement. The humor faded quickly. Do you ever think, Kheris asked, that we are exactly what the prey feared? Discards who learned to hate them? Idris considered the question. They feared anything that did not fit their categories, he said. You, us, anyone who might decide the rules are unacceptable. Hate, they understand. They can work with that. What they can't work with is people who refuse to be only what was written in their files. Part of me wants to kill every Praeux I see, Kheris admitted. Part of me wants to rip up their whole system, like tearing out a diseased root. If we turn this into a war of extermination, Idris said, we justify everything they claimed about predator species. We become the story they use to frighten client races back into compliance. Kheris's jaw flexed. So we must temper our rage. Yes, Idris said simply. Not because they deserve mercy, but because we deserve not to become them. Kheris thought of the technician he had spared on the observation platform. He thought of infants' files marked for termination because they might be too soft, too attached. I will try, he said. That's all any of us can promise, Idris replied. Get some rest, Kheris. Tomorrow we introduce the galaxy to what the Praeux tried to hide. Kheris nodded. When Idris left, he reassembled his weapon with slow precision, then lay down and stared at the bunk above him until exhaustion finally took him. Khasru filled Emberline's forward displays as a blot of metallic geometry and atmospheric swirls. From orbit, the processing complexes looked like silvery growths on the planet's surface, sprawling in rigid patterns. As planned, they emerged from Starlace Drive in a gravitational shadow, exploiting a transient gap in Praeux detection nets. The sudden compressions and expansions of space-time made hull metal vibrate with a subsonic moan. Tomas Roque grinned like a madman at the helm, every nerve alive. Window is open for 8 minutes, Argus 9 announced. After that, standard Praeux predictive routines will compensate for local anomalies. We must commit now. This is it, Idris said, voice steady. All units, proceed. Oleg's boarding strike on the nearby defense platform was a blur of violence. Explosions blossomed briefly along its outer ring as human charges breached. Praeux defenders scrambled too slow, unused to prey species attacking fortified nodes. Within, Nhari fighters moved like phantoms, their predictor weave tugging them a fraction of a second ahead of each shot and strike. Doors opened just when they needed to. Systems faltered where Senu's pre-planted code knives bit. In under 6 minutes, the platform's main weapons fell silent, its targeting arrays skewed to show empty space where Emberline now burned hard for atmosphere. The entry was rough. Khasru's thick air clawed at the hull. Plasma kissed hull plating. Flame turned viewport visuals into a hellscape. In the dropships, Kheris and the other Nhari tightened harnesses. The weave thrummed against their skulls, feeding them projections of descent trajectories, potential Praeux interception patterns. Remember the objectives. Yara's voice came through, calm despite the turbulence. She had insisted on being planetside, to be there if any Nhari froze under the weight of what they would see. We are not here to take revenge on every individual. We are here to break their system. I know, Kheris said. His claws dug into the restraints as much to ground himself as to brace for landing. They hit hard but alive. Ramps dropped. Heat and the smell of processing chemicals washed in. The interior of the Khasru complex was a nightmare made real. Rows upon rows of tanks stretched into the distance, connected by pipelines, cables, feeders. Some held recognizable young of various species, floating in viscous preservation fluid, asleep. Others held slurry, partially broken down organic matter in the slow process of being turned into a uniform feedstock. Every step Kheris took echoed with the knowledge that he had been meant for one of these vats. Possible futures diverted only by a freak salvage encounter and a human captain's refusal to look away. Some Nhari staggered briefly, overwhelmed. Others went very still, their rage cooling into a knife edge. Focus, Lena's voice said softly over the squad net. She was watching their vitals from Emberline, hands clenched white around the edges of her console. You cannot save everyone in here. Target your efforts. Hit the control nodes. Secure the archive. Argus 9 unfolded itself through captured Praeux systems like a virus. Senu guided it, understanding from the inside out how the Kulrites thought. Together, they infiltrated the central data core. Scrolling before them, in sterile code, was the Synarchy's taxonomy of life. Each species assigned a role: useful predator, herdable prey, uninteresting background fauna. Each individual marked with genetic evaluations. Here was the true horror. It was not indiscriminate slaughter, but meticulously planned pruning. Anyone flagged as insufficiently individualistic, highly affiliative, or excessive empathic mirroring in a species the Praeux wanted for hunters was culled. Conversely, in prey species chosen to remain cowed and isolated, individuals flagged as likely organizers, those who could unify and inspire, disappeared from the records shortly after their markers appeared. "They've been killing leaders before they're born," Amari whispered, watching from orbit. "They've been shaping civilizational trajectories by erasing anyone who could change the script." On the Khasru floor, Kheris moved toward a chamber that Argus flagged as high priority. The door slid open to reveal rows of cryotubes nearly identical to the ones he had first awakened from years ago. Nhari, Jelathi. Humans, though, those were older records, from stolen genetic samples, not yet widespread. Species Kheris did not recognize, each labeled in Praeux glyphs, summarizing their supposed destinies and deviations. There was no mercy coded here, only efficiency. Behind them, alarms howled. Praeux reinforcements were arriving faster than anticipated. Velith Ren stepped from an elevator tube in the upper levels of the complex, surrounded by elite Synarchy hunters in adaptive armor. His personal gear shimmered as it synchronized with local data, crafting counters to Nhari combat patterns based on archival performance. They had studied how Nhari moved, how they struck, how they thought in the narrow band of situations the Praeux had allowed them. Velith was confident that his armor and tactics would absorb and rechannel that into their own advantage. His confidence faltered slightly when his first contact with the Ember Phalanx did not go at all as planned. Velith's team engaged a Nhari unit at a junction. The Praeux armor shifted and hardened in anticipation of certain trajectories. The Nhari did not take them. Instead of direct pounces, they used human-taught feints, retreating deliberately, drawing prey into kill zones where explosives and crossfires waited. They coordinated through the weave, their movements less like a pack and more like a platoon. Velith adapted quickly. He was not slow, but he felt, for the first time in many cycles, genuine surprise. These are not our hounds, he realized, with something like awe and loathing. These are something else. He drove his team toward the central core, knowing that if he could not stop the data broadcast, everything the Synarchy had built would be laid bare. In the data vault, Senu and Nikhil worked feverishly. "We need an uplink that bypasses Praeux choke points," Nikhil muttered. "We have to beam this out on frequencies their patrols can't fully jam." "I can route through their own emergency beacons," Senu said, eyes half closed as he interfaced with Argus and the local systems. "They will try to suppress distress calls from Khasru when they realize what's happening. We invert that. Make the distress calls carry truth instead of pleas." Argus split its awareness across thousands of connection threads. In multiple systems simultaneously, passive receivers that had long picked up only sanitized Praeux messaging suddenly got raw, unfiltered footage. The cameras in the cryo chambers transmitted images no one outside the Synarchy had ever seen. Infant after infant, suspended in tanks, labeled for unmaking because they were too gentle, too bonded, too likely to refuse orders to slaughter. Narration, assembled on the fly by Aisha Maduri, overlaid in a score of languages. She had pre-written multiple possible scripts for this, never quite believing she'd get to use them. Her words were simple, almost cold, letting the images speak. "This is how the Synarchy maintains order. These are not enemies taken in war. These are children, decided by genome alone to be unfit. They were destined to be nutrient slurry, never to see a sky. They are from your species, and mine. This is not an aberration. This is the system." On the Khasru floor, Kheris heard, faintly in his earpiece, the audio going out to the galaxy. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. He also heard another sound, a deep vibration building through the metal underfoot. "Reinforcements," Larku said grimly. "Lots." Velith Ren descended into the main processing hall like a blade. His armor caught and distorted the harsh lights. Behind him, his hunters fanned out, weapons raised. He took in the scene at a glance. Nhari unfreezing cryotubes, human marines blasting open tanks, infants being moved onto stretchers. One Praeux technician lay bound, medical patch on their head, a neat contradiction to everything his doctrine said should happen in such an incursion. An old part of him admired the audacity. He crushed that feeling without mercy. "You disgrace yourselves," he called out, in a language the Nhari would understand. His voice carried, assisted by local speakers. "You are rejects, errors. You exist because an enemy tampered with fate. You think you oppose us. You are built from our design. There is nothing in you that did not come from us." Kheris stepped forward into the open, weapons holstered. His squad bristled, but did not move without his signal. "You missed something," Kheris replied. His voice was amplified by human comms, making it echo around the chamber. "We are not just what you wrote. We are also what they chose to teach us. That is the part you will never understand." Velith's eyes narrowed. "If you were still ours," he said, "I would have corrected you for that insolence. Now I will erase you for a different reason, as an infection vector." Without another word, he gestured. Praeux weapons hummed as they unleashed. Adaptive drones spilled from ceiling ports, their targeting matrices locked onto Nhari biosignatures. The cavern erupted in violent motion. Nhari and humans scattered, some firing, some heaving infants' cradles toward exits as if fleeing a flood. The predictor weave flared in the Nhari's minds, painting potential trajectories, warning them an instant before a drone rounded a corner, hinting where to dive, when to leap. Even with those advantages, people died. A Marine took a bolt through the chest, collapsing without even a scream. A Nhari youth was decapitated by a drone blade while shoving a Jelathi infant tube out of a collapsing rack's way. Their blood sprayed across polished metal, stark and red, mixing with older stains. Kheris fought his way through the chaos, every movement an argument against the template Velith believed in. He covered humans as often as they covered him. He ripped drones from the air and slammed them into Praeux hunters. He did not chase fleeing enemies when rescuers called for help. At the periphery, Larku and a small team carved a path to an auxiliary exit, their charges blasting new doorways and walls never meant to be breached from the inside. Tomas's voice crackled in, "Dropships, inbound for extraction. You have 5 minutes before Praeux capital ships get firing solutions. After that, we're all vapor." In the data vault, Senu triggered the final send command. Broadcast at peak, Argus confirmed. Synarchy choke stations attempting jamming, overriding. In the Jelathi Commonalities Central Forum, Talla watched in horror and grim vindication as the Khasru feeds spilled into every civic display. Jelathi citizens paused in their daily routines, tendrils stilled to witness the Synarchy's hidden machinery of control. On smaller Praeux client worlds, alarmed governors saw images of culled children that might have been theirs, and for the first time considered disobedience. On human ships and stations scattered across known space, there was only stunned silence, followed by a flare of anger so intense it almost felt like a physical pressure passing through the networks. On Khasru itself, Velith Ren realized he had failed at the one thing he prided himself on, preventing contamination of the Synarchy's self-image. He redoubled his personal assault, driving straight toward Senu's position. Kheris intercepted him halfway. Up close, Velith was tall, armored like a segmented insect, eyes cold. His weapon, an energy blade designed to cut through metal and bone alike, hummed with lethal promise. The first clash was brutal. Velith's armor anticipated the standard Nhari lunge and was already shifting to counter before Kheris committed. The weave screamed warnings in Kheris's skull. He twisted mid-strike, altering his path in a way no Praeux simulator had ever accounted for, raking Velith's side instead of going for the throat. Sparks and blood sprayed. Velith staggered, more from surprise than damage. "You think your tricks make you equal," Velith hissed. "You are still predictable. You still fight close. You still—" He swung, expecting Kheris to meet blade with blade. Instead, Kheris dropped, letting the blade pass above him, and kicked a fallen drone up into Velith's face. Oleg's improvised moves, learned in a sweaty human training room, not a Praeux lab. Velith's armor compensated, but half a beat too slow. The drone's metal carcass hit his helmet, jamming one ocular sensor. His field of vision stuttered. Behind him, he felt through his network that one of his hunters had reached a critical console. The Exactor's gauntlet flicked a command signal, intending to trigger a core purge. A massive overheat that would vaporize the central processing chambers, killing everyone inside, including the infants still suspended, but denying the enemy further evidence. His gauntlet flashed red in denial. The command did not propagate. Argus 9. riding piggyback on his signal paths. Cut the link. Your failsafes aren't listening to you. Nikhil's voice came faintly through the battlefield din. They're busy broadcasting your sins, Velith snarled. For perhaps the first time in his life, his control was slipping. He lunged at Kheris with renewed fury, blade angles shifting unpredictably. The weave flickered frantically. Kheris felt a line of searing heat creep along his shoulder as the blade grazed him, cutting through armor and drawing blood. He drew back, blinking away pain, claws digging into the floor for traction. Idris appeared at his side, having fought his own path through the chaos. He was breathing hard, sweat and soot streaking his face. He held a compact plasma carbine, its barrel scorched. Thought you might want a hand, the human captain said, almost conversationally. This is our mess, Kheris began. It's ours too, Idris retorted. We decided to interfere. We see this through together. Velith regarded them both with a chilling detachment, even as blood trickled down his leg from the earlier wound. Perfect symbolism, he said. Defective hound and overreaching prey, standing shoulder to shoulder. You think this alliance will endure? You will turn on each other when your aims diverge. It is inevitable. You might be right, Idris said. That's a risk we live with. Unlike you, we don't kill everyone who might someday disagree with us. He fired. Velith's armor drank most of the energy, but the force rocked him back a step. Kheris used that moment. He closed in, not like a Nhari trained by Praeux doctrine, but like a street fighter who'd learned in cramped bunk rooms and sparring pits. He feinted high, then went low, claws scraping along armor joints. At the last second, he saw through the weave that Velith anticipated the low strike, so he aborted it mid-motion, using his body torque to spin instead, tail snapping out to wrap around Velith's ankle. Velith had not modeled tail strikes as primary tactics. It was a blind spot built into his assumptions. Kheris yanked. The Exactor lost balance, even as his blade swept down, aimed straight for Kheris's skull. Idris moved without calculation. He threw himself into the path of the descending blade, pushing Kheris sideways. The blade sheared through Idris's armor, cutting into his side. Heat and pain flared white-hot. Idris heard his own breath explode out of him in a ragged grunt. From Kheris's perspective, time slowed. His first instinct was to go berserk, to tear Velith apart in a frenzy. But even in that whiteout moment, something Yara had said months ago lodged like a hook. If you let rage make your choices, you are giving the Praeux exactly what they bred you for. Instead, he focused that fury. He used Idris's collapsing body as cover, rolling under Velith's guard, and drove his claws up into a gap he'd spotted earlier at the juncture of hip and torso. Bone and synthetic lattices cracked. Velith shrieked, his blade arm spasming. Kheris didn't stop. He ripped and tore, then wrenched sideways. Velith's lower body gave out. He toppled, his armor spasming through useless tactical modes. Kheris stood over him, chest heaving, blood his and others spattering the metal. He could kill the Exactor then, easily. A simple downward strike to the throat. It would feel satisfying. He thought of the infant still being carried past, cradled in Nhari and human arms. He thought of the broadcast still streaming. Killing Velith wouldn't change those outcomes. It would simply scratch a personal itch. He hissed, a sharp, contemptuous sound, and stepped back instead. Let him live long enough to watch it fall apart, he said coldly. Velith, shock and blood loss, blurring his vision, glared up at him. You can't unmake what we built, he gasped. We seeded it in every fiber of every mind we touched. You can kill some of us. Save some of your pet aberrations. The pattern will reassert. Maybe, Idris said hoarsely from where he knelt. One hand pressed to his wound, the other braced on the floor. But today we've given a lot of people a reason not to cooperate with you. That's a start. Alarms changed pitch. Argus 9's voice cut through. All units Praeux capital ships have entered firing range. Orbital bombardment imminent. Extraction protocols now. Kheris grabbed Idris under one arm despite the captain's half-hearted protest. You are not dying here, Kheris said. Lena would be furious. Oleg, battered but alive, appeared on the other side, supporting Idris's other shoulder. Between them, They dragged him toward the evacuating flow. Senu emerged from the vault, eyes dazed, head pounding with data. "Broadcast complete," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "They can't put it back in the box." Larku's voice crackled in. "Evac corridor clear. Dropships waiting. Move, move." They left Velith lying amid the wreckage of his own certainty. Emberline clawed her way back into space under a rain of Praeux fire. Tomas jinked and rolled, cursing creatively in 3 languages. Argus 9 reallocated shielding in tight pulses, letting some shots burn through non-essential plating to keep the core and dropship docks intact. They reached the star-lace coordinates with hull temperatures edging into the red and structural stress warnings flashing like an angry constellation on every status screen. "Jump now, now, now!" Nikhil shouted, voice cracking, as if the driver cared about human urgency. The star-lace drive engaged, space folded, time flexed. For a fraction of a second, every atom on Emberline felt simultaneously very heavy and very light. Some humans vomited. Some Nhari keened involuntarily, their inner ears rebelling. Then stars reappeared, different stars, calmer. They had made it. On the med deck, Lena stood over Idris's bed, hands bloody to the wrist. The wound had been bad, but not immediately fatal. The blade had missed the spine by a precious centimeter. "You are deeply inconvenient," she told him when he finally regained full consciousness. His laugh became a cough. "You love me," he rasped. "Annoyingly, yes," she replied, relief making her brusquer than usual. "Do not do that again." Kheris lingered at the doorway, guilt and gratitude, a complex knot in him. Idris caught his eye and jerked his chin in a come-in motion. "You pushed me out of the way," Kheris said. "I did," Idris agreed. "Why?" Kheris demanded. "Strategically, letting him kill me might have distracted him longer. You are more important to this effort than I am." Idris's gaze was steady. "You're wrong," he said simply. "About our relative importance and about the point. I didn't do a tactical calculation. I saw someone I cared about to take a hit, and I moved. That's what we do. That's what we're trying to teach you. Is allowed, even if it's not efficient." Kheris swallowed. "It felt like betrayal," he admitted. "Letting you take the blow." Lena would later tell Yara that this was the moment she saw Kheris's relationship to himself shift again. He was not simply a repurposed weapon. He was someone whose life others would risk theirs for, without a breeding program or performance evaluation in mind. The galaxy did not transform overnight because of the Khasru broadcast. No single revelation could undo centuries of fear, habit, and complicity. But things did change. The Jelathi commonality publicly condemned the Synarchy's practices for the first time, breaking with a tradition of cautious neutrality. Talla pushed for and won a vote to provide covert support to human operations aiding species targeted by hunts. Several Praeux client races quietly refused to deliver previously agreed-upon harvest quotas. Ministers resigned, citing ethical concerns they hadn't dared voice before. Some disappeared. Others survived because the Synarchy was suddenly too busy trying to plug propaganda leaks to purge them all. Within the Synarchy itself, fissures widened. Younger Praeux, who had grown up in the comfortable assumption that their role was natural and justified, now saw images of children of their own species flagged for genetic counterproductivity. Doubt crept in, where arrogance had lived unquestioned. On Bastion K2 and Emberline, normal routines resumed as much as they ever could, around the edges of a conflict rapidly becoming less shadowed. The infants pulled from Khasru's tanks began to wake, one by one, into careful arms. Human, Nhari, Jelathi, soft, uncertain, all needing feeding and warmth, and someone to look at them and see, person, not material. Kheris stood in the nursery one cycle, watching a newly awakened Nhari squirm and yawn. This one's crest was a slightly different pattern than his own, her eyes a paler shade. She regarded him with sleepy curiosity. "You will never see the inside of a Praeux vat," he told her quietly, though she could not understand the words yet. "You will not be a file. You will be whatever you decide." Yara, leaning against a nearby wall, listened without interrupting. Behind them, On a muted wall screen, a newsfeed replayed, the now iconic image of Nhari standing guard over infants' tanks, flanked by human soldiers. Commentators argued furiously in subvocal text scrolls. Were these humans brave or mad? Were the Nhari a salvation or a disaster waiting to happen? Argus 9 pinged Idris on the bridge. "I have intercepted new Praeux communications," the AI said. "It appears Khasru was only one of several processing hubs. There remain at least 8 identified facilities with incomplete records. There are likely more, hidden more deeply." Idris stared at the map that bloomed in the air. New red points, marking new horrors. "We always knew this wasn't a one and done," he murmured. "We gave the galaxy a glimpse. Now we have to live up to it." He turned toward the main viewport. Out there, in the sprinkled darkness, some stars now shone with the awareness of what had been done in their names. Others still slept, or chose to look away. The Praeux were wounded, not broken. Their hunts would not stop entirely. Power never ceded its grip that easily. But somewhere in a quiet corner of Bastion K2, a human and a Nhari knelt together beside a crib and agreed without needing to say it out loud that whatever came next, they would go on intercepting those who had been written off and teaching them that destiny could be edited. The hunt, Idris realized, had indeed changed. No longer only from predator to prey, but from those who had decided some lives were expendable to those who, against all strategic advice, refused to accept that. Emberline's engines rumbled softly as the crew prepared her for another departure, new coordinates scrolling onto the nav boards, another faint anomaly, another rumor of a reclamation shipment, another chance to snatch someone out of the Synarchy's maw. The war ahead would be long, messy, full of hard choices and compromised victories. But for the first time since humanity had learned there was a hierarchy of hunters above them, they were not alone at the bottom. They had allies who knew, from birth, what it meant to be labeled unworthy by a cruel design. And that, stubbornly, defiantly, was enough reason to keep moving.